Hello everyone, we're going to get started in just 1 or 2 minutes. I'm just waiting for a few more people to log in and then we'll get started. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining today. So today we're going to be talking about designing and managing a peer mentoring program. I see my name still says Brenda Jimenez. My name is not Brenda Jimenez. That is fixed. If you're looking for something that wasn't peer mentoring and a peer mentoring program, then you're in the wrong place. And now is your chance to log off. If you were here for it, then we'll go ahead and get started. So a bit about me. My name is Jack Kavanaugh. I am the Director of Training and Program Development for Mentor New York. I'm assuming if all of you are here, you are at least somewhat familiar with Mentor New York. But in case you are not, as an organization, Mentor New York is a catalyst trainer and consultant for mentoring programs across New York State. We're part of a national network of organizations such as ourselves who provide these services to mentoring programs around the country. I'm going to talk a bit more about our sort of national presence in a minute. But what we do is we don't work directly with young people, but we partner with and serve those of you who do to help you best improve your relationships, your programming, your structures, and elevate mentoring across New York State. Me personally, my background is in social work. So I'm a New York State licensed master social worker. I've been working with youth and youth programming for the better part of the last a little over 15 years now. And that includes working in schools, after school programs, mentoring programs, summer camps, public-private school systems, and community centers and other community-based organizations. I've been with Mentor New York for about closer to probably 3 years and 2.5 at this point. It'll be 3 years this summer. I am based out of our Western New York office. We do have an office up in Buffalo, and the bulk of our staff is in New York City. But we do serve programs across the state. So no matter where you are around the state, or even if you're from not New York, we're more than happy to provide you with some resources, connections, and our support. So let's start just taking the temperature of the room. We're going to use this poll everywhere a few times. So you can answer this one of two ways. You can go to pollev.com/JackK840, or you can text JackK840 number 22333 and answer the question. How are you feeling today? Never been better? Hump day, Wednesday, or you need it to be the weekend already, or dear God, to get you out of this house? I'll give folks a minute to respond. See if I can do my response too. So a lot of people feeling pretty Wednesday. Oh, never been better in there. Oh, never mind. Oh, there it is. Pretty wide mix. That's good. Every once in a while, I get a dear God, get me out of this house, and I'm like, oh God, sorry for that person. But it looks like we're managing pretty well as a group. It's always good to get the little temperature beforehand. So I always design these to typically run for about an hour to an hour and a half. I'm going to let you guys know now, we're not going to take a break or anything, but I don't try to use the full time. I try to leave the last at least 15, 20 minutes for questions. So, keep that in mind as you're sort of pacing out if you need to use the restroom or refill up your water or get some tea or whatever it is that you got to do. I believe we scheduled this for an hour and a half. Typically, they run a little bit closer to an hour, but again, I like to give a little extra time for questions, and it's always better to plan for a little bit more and let you go early than it is to say we're going to be an hour and then you stick here for an hour and a half. But that said, if you do have questions as we go, I highly encourage you to use the question box that should be on the right of your screen. I do try to keep my eyes on it and keep tabs on it, so I can answer questions as we go. I might not get to all of them kind of as we go. I might save some to the end, but feel free to type them in there at any point. So let's ask a second question. Which one best describes you? You run or work at a peer mentoring program, you're a mentor in a peer mentoring program, you're thinking of starting a peer mentoring program, or you're just kind of curious. Good mix of folks. I give people another couple seconds to respond. All right, so it seems like a lot of folks are thinking about starting a program. Awesome. That is helpful. So before we get started, I want to dive into this. All of the work that we're going to talk about, all the things we're going to really be talking about today are reflective of what we call elements of effective practice for mentoring. Now, if you've done work with us in the past or been to one of our webinars or engaged with us on some level, you're probably somewhat familiar with the elements of effective practice. Like I said before, Mentor New York is part of a national network of organizations, and our national office is called Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. What national really does, and what our national office does, is helps really dive into the research of what works with mentoring, what doesn't, what sort of best practices should we be aware of, and how can we as mentoring practitioners be as responsive as possible to the research. We're also taking concerns that we're hearing from folks who are doing programming on the ground, connecting with young people, building programming, and elevating that up to researchers so that their research is reflective of the needs and wants and desires of the communities that we serve. And so the Elements of Effective Practice for Mentoring is it's a thick book about that big, full of all these evidence-based standards and benchmarks and enhancements that you can really make to your program to make sure they're meeting all of the evidence-based best practices. I highly encourage you to spend some time looking through these resources if you have not yet. Currently, it is the 4th edition. It is available for free on our national office's website, which is mentoring.org. If you do go to mentoring.org, there's lots of other resources on there as well. And I will send you that link in a follow-up email, along with the slides from today's presentation and a link to the recording if you wanted to rewatch or share with your colleagues. You're more than welcome to do so. Over the past few years, after they did the 4th edition for the Elements of Effective Practice, one of the things that they started to do was create supplemental materials around specific types of programs. So for example, mentoring LGBTQ youth or mentoring in the workplace. And one of the most recent supplements that they've come out with was the Elements of Effective Practice for peer mentoring. And so really what we're going to go through today is what are the specific recommendations for peer mentoring programs that make them different and unique from a more traditional mentoring program. Some of you may have attended last month when we talked about group mentoring. It's going to be very similar in structure. Again, just going through what is it that makes peer mentoring unique and what are some specific things you want to make sure you're highlighting and some specific things you want to make sure you are, some specific traps and pitfalls you're avoiding. And so the Elements of Effective Practice are divided into 6 sections. That is recruitment, screening, training, matching/initiating, monitoring and support, and closure. And so we're going to walk through those specific 6 elements, 6 pieces of operating a mentoring program, and talk about how that differs when a peer mentoring program. Lastly, I also think the sort of unofficial 7th element of effective practice is evaluation. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about evaluation because there aren't necessarily specific recommendations based in the EEP supplement around peer mentoring, but I do want to just give you a bit of thoughts that we've had and noticed in our work that have changed in the way programs do program evaluation for peer mentoring programs. So that's kind of how it's going to get structured today. I'm trying to include a few videos, a couple polls in there, so hopefully we can keep it as interactive as possible, so it's not just me talking on a video for the next hour, because I don't think any of us want that. And again, I also try to keep them pretty general and high level, so that way you can ask specific questions about your program. So I highly encourage, if you're thinking to yourself, hey, how does this apply for me? My program does something this way or another way. What's the best way for us to kind of engage with these? How do we put these into action? What does this mean for us? Please ask, please put in the question box. I really would love that to happen. I love people ask questions, it helps me make it real for you. So that's the stage for today and kind of how it's going to go. So let's just kind of dive in. So let's start with some definitions. What is peer mentoring? Peer mentoring is a mentoring relationship in which an older peer offers their support to youth. I will say 2 things before we dive in. One, we use a lot of the language because a lot of the research is specifically around mentoring for our youth and young people. When we use that language, a lot of times we're talking about young people up to about age 25. A lot of the research around youth mentoring focuses on middle school and high school age programs, particularly for peer mentoring. That's where they tend to happen. We've worked with lots of peer mentoring programs that also happen in the workplace with young adults, that happen in higher educational institutions, and all the things we're going to talk about are pretty much the same in my experience in those different settings, even with adults or young adults or in the workplace, higher education, whatever it is. So just don't be put off by that language as much as possible, but it is to understand that when we're talking about, this is all based on the research and evidence that we've been able to accumulate, and most of those studies have looked at programs specifically with predominantly middle school, high school age youth. So just so that's as we're talking through. So again, peer mentoring is a mentoring relationship in which an older peer offers their support to youth. I think peer mentoring specifically shines during periods of transition. Mentoring in general is particularly effective during periods of transition, but if we think about the issues that young people deal with when they're engaging and entering into a new space, whether that's a new school, a new job, entering. I worked with a program that does peer mentoring for young people who are leaving the foster care system or dealing with homelessness, all of these types of things where young people are transitioning into a new setting, a new space, and a new community. Peer mentoring is really, really, really going to help them. And we're going to talk about why that is in a minute, but it's particularly beneficial during those periods of transition. And when we think about a peer mentor is old enough to be someone that they can look up to, someone that they can say, hey, this is someone that has some experience that I can draw on, has been through some shared experiences, has done these things, has those capabilities of me to look up to them, but they're still young enough to be that relatable and a friend and someone. They're not 20 years older in a way that we just can't relate to them. And sometimes it's not always about age, especially in the workplace. Sometimes it is about just, other kinds of experiences, but particularly we're talking about youth. Peer mentoring typically happens with young people between peers, mentees, and mentors who are about 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 years apart. And so again, close enough to be relatable, but far enough away that it's someone they can look up to and sort of see in that mentor light. A few of the specific benefits of peer mentoring is it really focuses on intentional community. I think this is one of the biggest benefits of peer mentoring is, again, thinking about that transition, thinking about that engagement in a new community, a new space, a new school, for example. Peer mentoring really opens up the ability for that community to really take seriously and intentionally that bringing in of new people, right? We're taking mentors who are members of that community and using their capacity, time, energy, compassion to rope in and bring in young people who are entering into that community. And so it's really about building that sort of culture and that general, I guess culture is the best word, of mentoring practice. That mentoring is something we do. We are a community. We look out for each other. And it's a really simple way to drive home that is something that your community and your space values. Additional social support and acceptance. Like with any mentoring program, one of the big pieces of it is having a mentee who is able to tap into and access the mentor's social capital, right? This is my network. These are the things that I bring to the table. And now you're tapping into mine. But because it happens within the confines of a specific community or a set of spaces, again, whether that's a school or a workplace or a community center, that young person who's coming in as the mentee now gets access and instant membership into that social program, into that social system. So they're accepted into it, they're supported already by virtue of the fact that their mentor already has that social system built up in that community. And so as their peer, they can tap right into that social support, right into that level of acceptance, and start to really dig in deep into that type of level of community right off the bat. And one of the other big things, and again, I'll talk more about this in a minute, is with peer mentoring, it's also really important, even more than other mentoring programs, to focus on the benefit that it's getting for the mentor. Because in a lot of ways, that mentor, they're still a student, they're still a young person themselves. And so they're really able to build a lot of those leadership skills, grow self-esteem, and develop themselves personally in a way that they might not be able to as part of a traditional mentoring program getting mentored, right? They have trust that's put on them, they have leadership that's put on them, and that's really important. A few of the potential concerns or pitfalls that you really want to make sure you're paying attention to. The first is that boundaries are crucial. Whenever the mentor-mentee are close in age, it becomes a lot more dangerous that they will begin to blur their boundaries. They'll begin to stop seeing themselves as mentor-mentee and just as like good friends. And part of that is great. That's why peer mentoring is so powerful, is because they're able to really be approachable as just a true friendship experience because they are peers. But on the other hand, we also want to make sure while they're in the confines of that mentoring relationship that they are being respectful of those boundaries, they are understanding their role. And so particularly when it comes to training and oversight, we really want to make sure that those are really tightly developed and we're providing a lot of really good structure and training for the mentors, because you really just, these are not young people these are not mentors who have developed those same types of social skills, boundaries, and norms that adults who are coming into the mentoring relationship might. And so again, really remembering that as the person running the program, we need to really focus on providing those mentoring supports to the mentors themselves, because again, they're still young people themselves. And so they need that extra support because they have not fully developed in the same way that an adult might have. And so when we're thinking about peer mentoring, I like to think of 3 specific key focus points, and we'll come back to these throughout the presentation today. The first one is that emphasis on community. Peer mentoring, when it's most successful, is as part of a program designed to build and develop an intentional community and practice. We want to make sure that those relationships are happening in a way that is really centered around that, developing community. The second piece is about building that pipeline. We're using peer mentors let me back up. With any mentoring program, very frequently former mentees will turn into mentors, or mentors will find their friends or other people, and word of mouth will come and be part of your recruitment pipeline. That's great. With a peer mentoring program, it's even more likely that former mentees are going to become future mentors, and that's a good thing, right? We want to encourage that because it builds this sense of community, this sense of mentoring is just something we do here, and that's the end point that I think we want to get to, where we think about your school, your community site, your whatever it is, that at a certain point you're able to say, mentoring is just part of the way we do business. And so you build that pipeline of mentors and mentees as they're coming in, because it becomes so normal. Hey, I was mentored when I was a 9th grader in this high school. Now I'm in 11th grade and I want to give back because that's part of what I do. I had a really positive experience. It's barely a conscious choice at that point. It's just part of how I engage in this community. And that's really crucial. The third part is that boundaries and roles. And again, we talked about that before, and we'll talk more about that when we get to sort of the training and supervision section, but I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to really focus on that with any peer mentoring program. Boundaries are really, really, really crucial. I do mentoring trainings for mentoring programs a lot, and we're always talking about boundaries, right? Parts of ourselves we bring to the table and parts of ourselves that we leave at home. And the closer in age those matches are, the trickier it becomes. And so we really want to make sure that as program coordinators, as the people who are managing and overseeing the mentees and the mentors, that we're being really clear with both of them. This is your role. This is the point of this program. This is what we're trying to get out of it. And these are the types of roles and things that you can most, benefit from. Here are the skills, here are the tools you need. We want to really just equip them for success. And so really focusing that as we think about, what are the boundaries and what are the roles in regards to the mentoring relationship. So these are the 3 key focus points, and I want you to keep these in mind, throughout this presentation and taking away from this. If there's nothing else that you take away from this today, it is these 3 points. Focus on community, build a pipeline, build a culture, and make sure you're focusing on boundaries and role clarification. You may have seen these videos before. I share these in a lot of trainings and webinars that we do. So if you have seen it before, then great, you get to see it again. I love this video because it has really cute kids in it and I just really enjoy it. But overarching all of our work, we always encourage mentoring programs to include developmental relationships. And so as we're thinking about program design for peer mentoring, it's particularly crucial that we figure out how we're building these 5 pieces into our program. We're gonna watch a quick video that goes through them, but I really think that, again, we need to think about how we are doing this in a way that is both for the mentors and the mentees. And so part of that peer mentoring program is ultimately about us as the program practitioner mentoring the mentors who are then mentoring the mentees. And we need to keep that framework in mind. So with that said, let's just watch this brief video. That's not gonna work. I gotta do it this way. And so I think that's a really important tool. One, I just really enjoy that video. I don't know if you guys have this where you have like YouTube videos bookmarked for like when you're in a bad mood. And I just really like watching those kids to talk about the different elements. But I do think it's really important for all of us to have that as a centering framework for how we're making sure the relationships that we're providing young people, the resources that we're providing them, are adequately designed to give them the resources, skills, and benefits that they desire. And so again, making sure that those relationships, are designed to provide, folks who express care, share power, provide support, challenge growth, and expand possibilities. How are we doing those things, both for the mentors and the mentees in the peer mentoring program? So again, the elements of effective practice: recruitment, screening, training, matching and initiating, monitoring and support, closure, and evaluation as the sort of unofficial seventh. So we're going to walk through these and talk about how they differ based on, in peer mentoring programs versus more traditional mentoring programs. And again, feel free to ask any questions. So let's start with a quick poll. I want you to think about what makes a successful mentor. Good responses coming in. I have one of my own. So a few things are coming up, right? Caring, listening, boundaries, focus on the relationship. I'm guessing those two came together, as well as mentee's perspective is always really important. Engagement, guidance, all of these are things that are crucial in a mentoring relationship. And I think it's important to think about all of them in a way and thinking about how are we designing our program to make sure that the mentee is getting this from their mentor. And so all of the elements of effective practice are designed to give us tips, strategies, and tools to make sure that all of these things are in place for the mentee getting what they need from the mentor. So from recruitment all the way down to closure, all of these things are happening in a way that is designed to give the best experience to the mentee. And so let's keep these in mind as we're walking through. So let's talk about recruitment. As with any kind of mentoring program, any type of recruitment, we want to make sure we're finding mentors and mentees who would benefit from the program. And especially with a peer mentoring program, you want to prioritize those mentors who would really benefit, right? So when we're recruiting mentors, thinking about from that perspective of how are we building this pipeline and how are we making sure that we're providing the resources that the mentors need, because they really need to be benefiting from this program in much the same way the mentees are, which is different than how you might recruit mentors for a traditional program if you're looking for adults, right? We're not always thinking about their benefit. But for peer mentoring programs, we do want to keep that in mind while we're doing our mentor recruitment. We also want to make sure we're providing parents, guardians as much information as possible if you're dealing with young people, under the age of 18. It's also good practice if you're working with like college students to, incorporate some sort of family engagement with anyone, just because, it's positive, but obviously that's not always feasible with people over 18, both legally and practically. But especially for young under 18, we want to make sure we're engaging with them, parents and caregivers, guardians, whoever, around what types of resources we're offering them, making sure they know they're part of this program, making sure that they have that buy-in. When we start with that family engagement from the recruitment end, like right from the get-go, then we're going to be a lot more successful long-term in engaging those young people in the program, because we have some sort of external third-party buy-in. If we're doing it as part of a school system, It can be just as important to get that type of buy-in from teachers, educators, counselors, and whatnot as well. So share those types of resources as well. We also want to make sure that the parents know how the mentors, if we're talking about mentee recruitment, how the mentors are going to be screened and trained and all of that stuff, right? We want to make sure that they're really clear that we're setting the young person up for success. Next, we want to make sure we're setting expectations from the beginning around respect and having a positive attitude. It's just really important that we set that tone from the beginning, that this is the expectation of our program. We also want to recruit a diverse mentor pool. The more diverse of a mentor pool we have, the more options and tools we're going to have when it comes to finding someone who's the best fit for each mentee, right? We want to make sure that each mentee is able to be paired with someone who is a great fit for them, and having a diverse mentor pool is going to make that much easier. So let's talk about screening. When we talk about screening, we talk about screening in terms of two specific subsets, right? Both safety and suitability. If we're doing a peer mentoring program, typically we're not going to be running, background checks, things like that. If we're having 16-year-olds as mentors, or as if we're in college, because then our mentees are probably over 18 and we're less concerned about that there as well. But it doesn't mean we don't want to be doing any sort of screening for safety. We want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence around who we're having in as mentors. Are we talking to their references? Are they encouraging looking at talking to teachers that they might have, or professors, or people who know them well, and making sure that there is a clear sense that when you're putting these mentees in, we're setting them up for success, right? We're making sure that the mentors we're putting them in touch with are people that are going to provide them with a safe and caring relationship. On the other side is that suitability, right? Is this just someone, sure, they kind of pass all the tests for safety, but do they pass the test for suitability? Are they just a good fit for my program? Can they commit to this? Do I feel comfortable with their ability to just navigate relationships in a way that's going to provide that experience? Are they willing to take direction and feedback when I give it to them around, strategies to use or things that they should or should not be doing? And so we want to make sure we're really clear about that as well. And one of the big things when it comes to peer mentoring, especially, is scheduling and any kind of conflicts around just the sort of nuts and bolts piece. One of the things that can happen a lot with peer mentoring is, we're thinking a lot of peer mentoring programs that happen in like school settings or as part of a structured after school program. They're part of a structured setting, right? The school has a certain, set of periods a day or things like that. And so there's not a lot of wiggle room when it comes to dealing with those down the road. So making sure from the recruitment and screening stage at the very beginning that you're thinking about those things is going to be really important. And as well as any sort of, conflicts that come up, how would you address them? Any scheduling issues or time commitment, things like that. Especially, again, when we're thinking about young people, right? We're having to mentor the mentors. And for a lot of young people that want to be mentors, they might not have developed a lot of those skills around time management yet, those types of things. And so we want to be a bit more active in helping them see if there's something that they can do or not. And one other way to really effectively screen mentors is to observe them in your setting if possible. So again, if it's school or after school program or workplace, whatever it is, spend some time kind of observing how they interact with their peers. How do they interact with their friends? How do they interact with teachers or authority figures? You get a sense of who they are as a person, and that can be really helpful as well, because if you have that opportunity, you definitely want to take advantage of it. So for mentee screening, it's similar, right? What would they benefit? When you're really developing your program plan, you should really develop a very clear outline of who our program is for, a clear profile of mentors and mentees. Part of that is around thinking through what are the goals and outcomes we want to get out of our program. Is this something that's focused on social emotional growth, academic improvement, attendance, some combination of the three, or something else entirely? By defining what that type of specific outcome and purpose for your program is, It's going to help you figure out if the people that you're looking to recruit and screening are going to be good fits. If you're looking for, a mentoring program that's going to help improve young people's attendance over time at a middle school, and all of your prospective mentees have like perfect attendance, then, I'm sure they'd be great, but maybe they're not a good fit for a program that's around improving attendance if they already have perfect attendance, right? Just simple things like that you want to make sure you're thinking about. And again, scheduling availability and engaging parents and guardians or caregivers or, whoever's in their life is really important as well. I won't spend too much time on those because they're basically the same as the mentor screening for this. All right, so let's talk about training. This is where a lot of it happens. I mentioned this at the beginning. I think it's really true. When it comes to peer mentoring, training is absolutely crucial. And it's where we want to make sure we're spending a lot of our time in program design, is training and the monitoring and support. We're going to spend a lot of time on that too. So for training, you want to have at least 2 hours pre-match. So that means 2 hours before the mentor and mentee first interact. The reason we specify pre-match is, one, so that it happens beforehand, there's the 2 hours there, but also so that you're really providing a lot of extra resources as you go, right? Training is a continuous process, and we're going to talk about this more in the monitoring and support section, but it's important to think about as you're designing your pre-match training. That said, it should be at least 2 hours. I think you could get away with a little bit less if you really, trusted the mentors, they had some experience or they've done it before. But the research has shown us that minimum of 2 hours in order to get that really strong outcomes. I will say I find it best that you don't have to do it all at once. I would recommend doing like 2 1-hour sessions or something like that, or 2 1.5-hour sessions is probably ideal, as much as possible. When we think about training, again, the same way with screening, we divide that into 2 sort of sections. With training, we do that as well. We want to have that sort of administrative training and then the sort of programmatic piece. And for that administrative overview, it's really about, how often are we meeting? What paperwork do we need to fill out? What's the basic structure of the program? Who do I call if I have any questions? That type of really nuts and bolts stuff is really important. And you want to make sure you're getting that. But you also want to make sure you're talking about those sort of programmatic things. And that's what some of these other things are about, right? Managing those expectations. One of the big things that happens with mentors, and one of the main reasons why mentors burn out if they do, is because they have really high expectations of what they're going to be able to do. They're going to change this mentee's life. They're going to, do all this and all this other stuff. And then it doesn't happen and they feel disappointed and burnt out, and then they don't want to be part of your program anymore. So we really want to make sure we're managing those expectations of what the relationship is going to be like. Second, really basic engagement skills, especially for young people who might not have developed those, social skills that we kind of develop as an adult in some of the work settings that we have to deal with a lot of, meeting new people and navigating that. Spending time to break down those really basic engagement skills like active listening, conversation skills, asking open-ended questions, that type of thing. And then again, the boundaries of managing issues. So when I think about boundaries, I think about 2 things. One, those parts of ourselves that we bring to the table and those parts of ourselves that we don't. And really, I think we spend a lot of time talking about boundaries in terms of like, hey, don't talk about this topic or don't bring this up. But I think it's important to recognize that the other side of the conversation around boundaries is around what part of ourselves do we have to bring to the table, right? We want to make sure that the mentoring relationship is a 2-way street. It's a 2-sided relationship. And so it does mean sharing. And part of the beauty and effectiveness of a peer mentoring program is that they're able to share their personal experience because they're a peer and they've been through that same experience. And we don't want to, squash that. And so what I always tell, programs, and, we can follow up more on this if you have more questions about your program, but when I do peer mentor trainings, we really focus in on making sure that we're talking about and sharing parts of ourselves and our own story in a way that's really focused on the mentee's growth, right? What is it that they're getting out of this? Am I telling them this story because I think it makes me look cool and I want to share it? Or am I telling them this story because I think it's really helpful to them in understanding how to navigate a situation that they're dealing with? And so it's really important to make sure we're talking about that. And how to manage issues that do come up. If there's issues in the relationship, if a mentee is bringing up, really heavy, serious topics that the mentor doesn't know how to deal with, we need to tell them from the beginning, hey, if they're talking about questions of, sexual health or alcohol and drug use, or, things that are just, or, mental health concerns and things that are just too much for you to really wrap your head around and handle, like you are not a therapist or a social worker, right? How do you hand that off? And telling them from the beginning, these are the things we don't expect you to deal with. And if they come up, this is how you handle it. And this is how you hand it off to one of the staff, a teacher, a counselor, or whatever. Because if we don't tell them how to hand that stuff off in the beginning, they might be tempted to try and manage some of those things themselves and talk through those things in a way that is harmful, because we didn't tell them from the beginning that we don't want them to do that. So really, that's that role clarification that's so crucial. Really, what is it that they're there to do? What is it that they're there not to do? And where are the resources around them for when they run up against the boundaries of their role? So you also want to go over any activities, curriculum. If you have a structured curriculum or structured activities, that kind of thing, make sure they feel equipped to do that. I think it's always good to have some type of backup activity, because honestly, it's just really awkward to have two people sitting there staring at each other, just like having to talk about like themselves, even if it's just like drawing or playing like Candyland or something. I don't know. When I worked in a high school with high school students for a while, and I'd always have like the most like childish board games I could find, right? Like Candyland, things like that. And they loved it because it takes zero brain, energy. They can just really just, with Candyland, they flip the card, they move to that color, they, do what the card told them to do. It was really simple, right? We wouldn't be playing Monopoly, something that requires a lot of attention. It's just something for our hands and, minds to kind of do while we're talking. So really, at the very least, I encourage programs to do that because it just really staves off the awkwardness. If you get to know your mentors and feel like, it might be beneficial to talk about, trauma or things like that, I think that's really important. I think having a really basic understanding of trauma-informed mentoring and what that looks like and how, trauma impacts, might impact the mentoring relationship is really important. But how much of that and how deep you want to go into it is going to depend on, your setting. And so that's something that we can help you kind of troubleshoot and figure out how deep you want to go. Again, any resources, support network, if they're dealing with, again, if the mentee brings up really serious, heavy issues, how do they hand that off? What sort of supports and resources are available? And then lastly, confidentiality. Obviously, we want to make sure we're really clear about what confidentiality means for the mentoring relationship. What stuff are they keeping confidential? And what stuff do they have to share if it does get brought up, such as issues of self-harm or suicide or things like that? We want to make sure that the mentor is clear that if those things start to pop up, that they're coming to tell a teacher or tell a staff member. When it comes to mentee training, a few things. It's always good to have a mentee training. Always, you want to make sure they're on the same page as well. We always want to make sure that mentees are engaging in the mentoring relationship in a way that makes them feel like an active participant in the relationship and not like a passive recipient of, mentoring. This is not something that's happening to them. It's an active, engaging part of their experience that they are an active piece of. So we want to go over their roles and responsibilities. What types of things are they expected to do versus the mentor? Who's scheduling meetings? Who's bringing maybe some discussion topics? Who's filling out paperwork afterwards? Like that kind of stuff. What are the goals and expectations of your program? If you're focusing on, to use the same example as before, you're focusing on attendance, then be really clear with them, like, hey, we have this great program. We really are worried that you're not coming to school that often. We really want to make sure that, there's, we have the tools in place to help you, show up more and feel like this is a place that you want to be. And so we're going to have part of this program. And we're hoping that it gives you the tools and support you need to show up to school more often. Right, and that's going to get you much more positive feedback in terms of, constructive criticism. This works, this doesn't, from the mentee. Again, they're an active participant in the program. And again, as part of the training, engage those parents, guardians as possible, and then go over the nuts and bolts. You're going to meet this often. We're going to go over this thing. Make sure they're as clear as possible that it's going to happen this certain way or another certain way. Particularly from that trauma-informed perspective, we want to make sure that young people know what's happening in the space before they step into it. We don't want them walking into this relationship or these experiences and open up for surprises, right? You want it to be, really thoughtful. So matching and initiating, this is something that's not wildly different than when doing more traditional mentoring programs, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. But you want to consider the history of the mentee, the mentor matches, right? We want to think about they happen in the same community, and so they might have some history. They might know each other. They might, we want to be really cognizant of that. That doesn't necessarily a deal breaker. It's going to be unavoidable in certain ways, but you want to just keep that in mind while you're kind of matching them. And make sure we're matching them on similar interests, personalities, things like that. I think when it comes to matching, we can get really stuck on a lot of different pieces of matching, whether it's gender, race, age, I don't know, career goals, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, the most successful matching criteria is based on similar interests. I say that with the caveat that if your program is specifically about those things, so if you have a program that's specifically about building an identity as a young Black man, then that's going to affect who you match people with and how you recruit. If you have a program that's specifically about building self-esteem based on based on like gender identity, or if you have a mentoring program that's based on supporting LGBTQ youth, whatever it is, if that's the point of your program, then that's going to affect matching. But if it's not really the explicit function or point of what you're trying to do, then I would say don't overthink it. Really just focus on personality, interests, get to know them during the screening and interviewing process, and then, match them with people that you think will just match well. It's always good to start the match with some sort of activity, some type of group thing, some type of meet and greet. I think that's always been really effective. One of the things that I encourage programs to think about, if it's something that makes sense for you, is to incorporate some of those initial training sessions with the meet and greet. So you can have some type of 1 hour kind of orientation as like a second follow-up training, and then right afterwards they're getting together with their mentor and mentee and doing a big group activity. So the mentors are in one room doing a training, mentees in another doing a training, and then they're all coming together and meeting each other. This can also work in the same idea where you have them all together and you're doing a lot. Maybe you have like a contract that they're all signing, like this is the commitment, and it's a really powerful way to start the match, right? Everyone just got trained, they just went through orientation, they're all meeting each other, parents, guardians there, mentors there, mentees there, and they're all reading through this contract expectations and they're committing to it. They're saying, I'm committing to you, I'm committing to this relationship, and that's a really powerful start. The other thing is, as with any kind of new relationship that's really contrived, like a mentoring relationship, right? That's really built on, it's not like natural. They're not just meeting because they both happen to play soccer and they make friends on the team. We're telling them like, hey, you're going to be friends with this person and you're going to spend a bunch of time with them. It can be really awkward at first until they start to open up. And so doing some kind of activity or kind of, even the goofier, the better to get them out of their comfort zone is going to really help that relationship. I think of it like a kickstart or I don't know. I can't think of a good analogy, but it helps kickstart the relationship in a way. And again, including parents, guardians, I think is really important as well, making sure they're as prepared as possible to support the mentee through that process. So let's talk about monitoring and support. This is the other really big piece when it comes to peer mentoring relationships, is you want to meet at least monthly with the mentors, and at least twice the first month. Any issues you're addressing with them, you're giving them that support. And remember, you are in a lot of ways mentoring the mentor. I think that's true in any mentoring program, but it's particularly important in a peer program because, again, the mentor themselves is a young person. They're dealing with a lot of the same issues. We want to make sure we're providing them with the support as possible. Regular observations is really, helpful if you're able to kind of, sit in and kind of watch the relationships play out, or, get that firsthand experience is really, really helpful. Giving regular feedback and getting regular feedback from the mentors is really helpful, as well as the mentees if possible. What's working, what's not, are they dealing with any issues? Are they having problems with their match? And you want to make sure that feedback is open and be ready to leap in there and address any issues. Get in there and say, I know this is not working, so we're gonna, tweak this. Or if you hear 4, 5, 6 mentors, however many, sharing that they're all dealing with the same issue, you can pull them all together for an extra training session, that type of thing. The other thing I also encourage is, ongoing trainings. I'm jumping ahead on the bullet point list, but it just is a good segue here. When we give those initial trainings at the very beginning, things can be very abstract. They haven't worked with the mentees yet. They might not know, we're talking to them about active listening skills and developmental relationships. And they're like, I don't really know what this means. I haven't mentored anyone before. 3, 4, 5 months in, they've been doing it for a while. We do that same training with them. All of a sudden, it's a lot more real. It's tactile. They have experiences that they can draw on. So we want to make sure we're providing those additional trainings, ongoing things. That's even just revisiting trainings we've given them, topics we've already discussed. Making sure we're doing that is really, really, really important to being responsive to that feedback. We also want to make sure that record keeping is happening, right? We're meeting this time. We talked about this, really basic paperwork. It doesn't have to be anything onerous. We just want to make sure that the meetings are happening and that they're talking about or doing the things that we think they should be talking about, right? Really simple. And one of the things for peer mentoring specifically, if multiple matches are meeting, we want to make sure staff is present. If it's that one-on-one and they're meeting over lunch, you don't necessarily have to always be over them watching, but if multiple matches are there, it changes the dynamic in a way. You want to make sure that there's some type of staff that's there, so things don't get out of hand. And lastly, especially, I think this is so crucial, and I can't emphasize this enough. I feel like I've said it like 20 times already, but I'm going to say it again. Remember that we're there to also support the mentor's growth. And so much of what we want to design these programs around is really about that growth, that development, and that skill development. And so we really want to make sure we're spending as much time thinking about, growth mindset, how we're engaging with young people, making sure they're focused on growth as possible. So I'm going to share a quick video about growth mindset that I think is really powerful that we use to kind of go over this concept, because again, sometimes it's just better than listening to me talk about it. So I'm going to play this and then we'll circle back. So I really like that video for a few reasons. I think when we think about difference between growth and fixed mindset as it relates to mentoring programs, is it's about having that centerpiece that we can, have mentors and mentees really focus on that development, that we're focusing on that development for them, right? That they're using those relationships, those developmental relationships, those skills that we're equipping them with to elevate themselves and elevate the relationship going forward. And it's just a really important framework and a really useful framework for us to keep in mind as we're planning and organizing a structure, right? As we're starting to put together the ways that we interact with our program, the way we interact with the mentors, the mentees, all of that, we're really centering it and designing it around fostering some of that growth. And I think that's really important. So the last couple pieces is on closure and evaluation. So for closure, it's really about, especially with a peer mentoring relationship, about renegotiating the relationship, because they're going to see each other again. They're in the same community. They might be in the same school, workplace, whatever it is. They're going to continue to see each other. They're probably going to be friends afterwards, and that's great. But we want to make sure that the mentor and mentee have the skills they need to renegotiate that relationship. So at the end of that year, or 2 years, or however long the mentoring relationship formal as part of your program lasts, at the end of it, what does that look like for them? Are you still providing any kind of support? Is it just like, all right, you finished the program, now, you're off being friends, and that's great. Like, what does that look like, and how are we supporting them in that renegotiation? Because again, they're going to be in the same space. It's unavoidable. It's a little bit different than if we're looking at a community-based mentoring program with an adult and a young person. Like they might not find themselves in the same school or workplace ever again, but these folks won't be able to avoid each other after the relationship. So you want to take particular care as we're talking about the end of the relationship around how they're going to navigate that. Again, especially in closure, this is where we're really able to really dig deep and create that pipeline. The relationship's over, we're talking to the mentee, we're having them really reflect on the positivity of their experience, and then we're saying, this is wonderful. How would you like to be a mentor for someone else, now that you have gone through this? We're starting to build that up, right? Or how you can find your friends and encourage them to be part of it. They're having that positive experience. So as the relationship ends, thinking about how the mentoring relationship is then going to blossom and move into that larger community, and how you can leverage that to keep your program running and moving and expanding. I think it's good at this point to have that separate check-in with the mentor and mentee, maybe like a few months ahead of time before the relationship is going to end, around how are you feeling about this? What kind of support do you need? And then that gives you a sense of how to coach them through that process. Closure, any relationship ending is really hard for anybody, whether that's, an adult, high school student, middle school student, really anybody. Relationship ending is hard. And so I think this is really that time we need to take that step back and remember that our mentors are young people themselves. And this is the part where they really need a lot of support from the program, from the adults in the situation, to help them navigate the closure and the end of their relationship. It's absolutely critical. And then finally, having some type of final celebration, graduation, some type of, designated time where they can say, hey, we did it, this was great, let's reflect on the positive time we had, and really punctuates and ends the relationship on a high note. This is great for any mentoring program. We really want to make sure we're ending it on that high note that's focusing on the benefits, what they got from it, and creating that kind of formalized end point. You might have it as a graduation or just like a party, whatever it is, where the mentor and mentee can just thank each other and appreciate each other, is a really powerful tool for the relationship to end. And then lastly, let's talk about evaluation. Again, not going to be wildly different, but you want to make sure from the beginning you're setting really clear outcomes around what the program is, what the program isn't, and what type of benefits it's offering. Oh, sorry about that. I think the mailman went by, but we're almost done anyway. Again, we're thinking about evaluation. Remember that peer mentoring is about both mentor and mentee. What kind of outcomes are you expecting to see from your mentor? What growth are you seeing from them and from the mentee? And starting to develop, tests, structures, measures that's going to measure both the mentor and the mentee's growth and experience over the course. And then lastly, again, because they're part of this sort of contained ecosystem for a lot of mentoring programs, it's a school or a workplace or something, you're able to get in there and survey parents, caregivers, teachers, counselors, other stakeholders who may have seen that growth, who may have seen those mentors and mentees move and grow in specific ways, and you want to take full advantage of that. So I'm going to pause for questions. While we pause for questions, I'm going to ask all of you to fill out a quick survey for us. I'll also send the link to the survey out at the end of my follow-up email that I should send today or tomorrow. But in the meantime, what you can do is open up the camera on your phone and point at the little QR code on the screen here. And a little link to SurveyMonkey will pop up, and it'll take you right to our survey to ask how we did today. And you can let us know. I do read them. I do read the responses. I do tweak and change the way we deliver our webinars and trainings based on this. So I really would appreciate, the response. I really do value it. What I'm going to do now is just pause and see if anyone has any questions and put in the question box. I'm also going to put my email into the chat. You're always welcome to email us at any point and reach out for any specific questions. So I'm going to just wait for a moment to see if anyone has any, and then we will move on. Oh, it's a good question. So someone said, when might you terminate a relationship and how? So we have a specific webinar around like closure that's on our recording page. So I'll point you to for a bit of a deeper dive into this. So when I send a follow-up link to this recording, I'll also include the page that includes the recordings of all of our webinars. So you'll be able to access those. When we think about terminating a relationship, there's two things, right? There's the planned closure and unplanned, right? So the planned closure is we run for 12 months, and at the end of that 12 months, the relationship's over, the mentoring relationship ends, right? So that's really that planned closure. And so we're able to build systems and structures around that to lead up to it, spending a few months spending that time to it. The other side of that is those unplanned terminations, unplanned closures. And those happen for a few reasons. One of them might be that the mentor or the mentee is just no longer able to participate. They change schools, they take on a new class, they take on a new club, if you're at workplace, that person leaves and gets a new job. Like there's tons of reasons why people can't partake in the mentoring relationship anymore. And, we can kind of deal with those as they go. And then the other part is if you as the program coordinator have to decide to terminate the mentoring relationship. And so what you should do is when you're developing your program's protocols, procedures, policy book, you want to think about what are the different times and things that might result in that. And so there's not a sort of like a one size fits all. These are the things. I mean, obviously, if someone is harming their mentee in some way, I mean, that's a sort of bright line reason to end a mentoring relationship. If there's any kind of, physical or emotional harm that's coming to them, you want to be cognizant of that. And if we're doing a good job doing a lot of the monitoring and support, we should be able to catch those things early, which is really helpful if we're really engaging and getting to know our matches. But other things, any kind of, again, those boundaries get blurred. And so to me, that's one of the biggest places where mentoring relationships find issues, is when the mentor and the mentee, the boundaries between them get blurred a little bit. And we want to make sure we're spending as much time, coaching and supporting the mentors on that as possible. And so part of your policy procedure is going to be setting those boundaries for yourself of like, what are the acceptable behaviors and what aren't. And it's going to depend a lot on your setting. And so we can help you figure that out for your program specifically, if you'd like. But when it comes to the how, especially when it comes to those sort of, unplanned terminations, there's no real easy way to kind of navigate it. I think when we're talking about addressing with the mentor, and again, I think part of it is also remembering that when we're talking about a peer mentoring program, that again, the mentor is a young person also. And so we need to approach those conversations with a sense of sort of grace and, empathy in a way that we might not be able to muster in the same way for adults who might perpetrate the same behaviors, right? Who might push those boundaries in a way. And so I think we start with making it very clear from the beginning what our expectations are and what the consequences of those expectations not being met or violated will be, right? We expect that you will do these things. If they don't happen, we're going to have to ask you to not be part of the program anymore. We're saying that from the beginning. It's not a surprise 7 months in when they do something, or we want to set them up for success. We're setting clear boundaries, clear expectations, and then holding them accountable to those expectations. And so having that conversation with them. The other part of that is also about how we support the mentee through that transition, right? That's tough. They've built this relationship, all of a sudden to have it, kind of taken away from them. And so we want to make sure we have policies and procedures in place for, are we having them meet with a new mentor? Are you taking over as the adult in the situation and starting to kind of have those mentoring meetings with them until you can find someone new? Like, how are you managing that? There's no right or wrong answer. There's lots of different ways to handle it. It depends on your program, the capacity, the mentors, the mentees, but you want to make sure there is some type of written policy and procedure around what are we going to do in those cases to support the mentee and to help the mentor, phase out smoothly. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but we can follow up afterwards and go a little bit more in depth if you need any more information. All right, any other questions? I'll pause for a moment. All right, so I don't see any more questions coming through. I'm just going to share one quick thing before we depart for the day, and that is our New York Mentoring Network. So this is something we're rolling out this year, is a really great formal network for mentoring programs around the state to join, to be able to engage with each other. I think it's a really important tool for mentoring programs to share and learn and explore. Besides, attending our webinars, there's a lot of benefits that you'll be able to get from this, including access to an online forum with other similarly minded mentoring programs, extra trainings, and access to other kinds of resources. I don't want to go too in depth with it because we're towards the end of our time together, but if you go to mentornewyork.org/join the network, as you see there in the bottom right, and I'll put the link into the chat here so you can click it. There's a lot more detail, and you can talk to us about what that looks like for you and how we can engage to support you. Our job is to be trainers, consultants for mentoring programs. We do provide individualized consultations, and there are ways to get that to you at no cost. So please do reach out if you do have questions, concerns, or thoughts, and we can take it from there. Otherwise, I thank you everyone for your time. Please reach out if you need anything else. We're here to be a resource, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you, everyone.